Hi, this is the final project for Group 2 in Political Philosophy, and today we're looking at the question of whether happiness is getting what you want. And this is kind of a vague question because, well, what do we want? We can want a lot of different things. We can want money or power or prestige, or some of us want other things like meaningful relationships or a job that we enjoy. So happiness is kind of a vague term for any a positive emotional state where you're free from anxiety or worries or sadness. And why is this question important philosophically speaking? Well, it's a very basic philosophical question because everyone wants to be happy and everyone wants to know how to be happy. And it's the basis of political philosophy as well because, well, why would we give up some of our rights and freedoms to form a government if we didn't think we'd get something out of it that would make us happier? Whether it's protection of property rights, for example, or security, we want something out of our government that'll ultimately make us happier. But since we can want so many different things and we believe many different things about happiness and what makes us happy, we have many different views of how a government should be formed and how it should be structured. So it's really important for us to think about this question of what makes us happy, because that'll determine what kind of government we think is for the best. And for this project, we're going to be using Thomas Hobbes's view of happiness and applying that to all the other philosophers to see if they agree. Since we asked this question in the context of Hobbes, we thought that would be fitting. So, and I'll turn it over to Ian to explain what Hobbes believed.
Well, first thing is why did Hobbes write about happiness? What was the purpose of him writing about happiness? Because someone really doesn't just write something to write about it. Well, Hobbes is a man who lived in fear. When he was younger, his mother talked about the Spanish Armada who was invading England, and he claims that he was born that his mother gave birth to twins, himself and also fear at the same time. Um, so he thought, with that fear of death, he believed that it determined behavior. It was the crucial psychological assumption of his moral and political theorizing as an adult, which is why he asked the question or came to conclude that happiness is getting what you want. He also believed that absolute monarchy isn't something that really should be controlled as just one person for a whole society. Um, Living with that also created a lot of fear that all control is under one person. And as he grew older, he faced criticism from other philosophers for his work and everything that he truly believed in. People just kind of made fun of him for that kind of stuff. We picked out a quote to sum up support his statement. Um, Felicity is a continual progress of the desire from one object to another. Page 289. Basically, what that's saying is happiness is based on desires and getting what you want. So anything pleasing to somebody, whether that be money or whether that be a relationship, like John said, or buying a house or having a job, that makes you happy. Anything that doesn't create fear or anxiety inside of you. Um, it's good is synonym with desires, basically.
So we're gonna see whether the other philosophers agreed with Hobbes's understanding of happiness, and we're gonna start with Plato. We of course read some of his most famous work, The Republic, and in The Republic, Plato writes a lot about these four virtues that he believes are the most important. And the section we read specifically dealt a lot with justice. And Plato believed that justice could be defined as doing what you're best suited for. So he believed that a just society was not one where everyone did what they want. So let's say you want to be a baker or a butcher or something, but you'd rather be a soldier, but you're better suited to be a soldier. That in a just society you would be a soldier because that's what you're fit for, not because it's what you want. So in this way, justice is excuse me. So in this way, justice is the same thing as happiness for him because he thinks that if we give up our immediate desires and do something for the greater good, that this will create a just society. And what is a just society if not one where as many people as possible are are happy? So he doesn't agree with Hobbes. He doesn't think that just getting what you want will make you happy, but he believes that you should do something for the greater good, and that this will create the best society for everyone. And that's Plato. Next, we have Adam Smith. He was an economist who wrote The Wealth of Nations. And even though we primarily think of him as an economist, he was a philosopher as well. And we can sort of glean his philosophical views from his work on economics. And his big philosophical idea was this concept of the four stages of society. So he thinks that we developed to our modern state, which is capitalism, but we began as hunters, we became shepherds, farmers, before we got to our current state. So he believes that all of this occurs naturally and it happens in every society. So in this way, it's a rejection of Hobbes's social contract, because Hobbes believed that there's kind of an unspoken agreement where we all come together and we agree to give up all of our power and our rights to the sovereign, the people in charge. But Adam Smith doesn't believe our society developed that way. He thinks it just occurred naturally through these four economic stages. And with each stage, with each different type of economy, the purpose of the government and the nature of the government changed. So in our capitalist society, the government exists to defend property rights. And he believed that this should be really the main aim of government, along with protecting us, security-wise, protecting us from invasion and criminals, things like that. But he believes that the government should stay out of the economy. And this is a view that we would call a laissez-faire view of economics. And what this quote is saying down here is that people like the butcher or the baker, they don't sell you their product because they want to make you happy with their product. They're just doing it because they need money. And in this way, people are looking out for themselves first. They need to take care of their own financial security because this is what will make them happy. Economic prosperity is the same thing as happiness, really. So in this way, Adam Smith kind of agrees with Hobbes that just getting what you want, which most often means material things in the context of Hobbes, that's what's going to make you happy. So Adam Smith agrees with him.
Another great philosopher, Mary Wollstonecraft, was one of the earliest feminist philosophers who pushed for equal rights for women. She argued against the people who in the 18th century didn't really believe women should have an education. She suggested that women actually have a lot to do and a lot of help with society, because one of the biggest reasons was women are able to help educate our women and the younger generation. So she believed that with these unequal rights, that women aren't allowed to be educated, they won't be able to support their children as well. She also held the fact that religious and civil liberties were corrupt by men. Since everything was run by men, everything was run in a man's world, women didn't really have the opportunity or in fact the privilege to do these type of liberties. She really focused on virtues, moral standards, beliefs, instead of materialistic things like we talked about earlier with money and job and everything like that. We found a quote on page 256 that supported her belief. She says that the woman who strengthens her body and exercises her mind will, by managing her family and practicing various virtues, become the friend and not the humble dependent of her husband. So just like we said earlier, strengthening her body and exercising her mind, having that education that she believes that every woman should have will help with that. She also says that controlling others is not the path to happiness. Everybody should be their own independent person. Women should be their own independent woman instead of having to be controlled by men. Um, we added the quote in there, happy life, because nowadays that's pretty, it's very true. Knowing that your wife may be unhappy, you're probably going to be going through hell a little bit. Um, so yeah, so she does disagree, saying that materialistic things aren't as important than the virtues and the equal liberties that we face in life, and that is Mary.
Next up, we have John Stuart Mill, who was another English philosopher, and we read from his work on liberty. And what he really wrote about in this work is freedom of speech, and as well as religious freedom, which falls under that. And Mill, he writes about how he understands history as a struggle between authority and liberty. So these two great forces are central to history, essentially, and he himself is squarely on the side of liberty. And he thinks that, right, I'm going to use an example here of someone who, let's say a Christian, because that's the example he uses, who is absolutely certain that their beliefs are true and they're not willing to change it, that it's still good for them to hear some opposing arguments and hear some criticisms of their religion. Because if they never hear it, if they never hear criticisms, their faith becomes a dead faith, or as John Stuart Mill says, a dead dogma. So in this way, it's not really meaningful. It's not something you really think about. It just becomes a ritual that you do. Whereas if you question your beliefs, and really think about it, but still come to the conclusion that, you still want to believe in it, well, it's a lot more meaningful that way because you've put some thought into it. So in this way, really, Mill really values truth. He values intellectual debate. In this way, he disagrees with Hobbes because just winning an argument, just dominating others and getting what you want, well, that's not going to make you happy, but rather debate and truth and questioning your views, that's what's going to make you happy.
Karl Marx, another great philosopher, was one of many things, but he focused on being a philosopher and an economist. Marx talked about the surrounding issues of classes and class struggle. He often talked about how unequal the higher class is than the lower class. They think that the higher class, because of what they do, is they get more than the lower class, even though the lower class works harder. That being said, it destroys the connection between people who are in the lower class and the higher class. So people will be unhappy because they're not getting what they want, and equality isn't happening. Marx mainly talks about the political theory of communism, basically advocating class warfare and wanting property to be public, and instead of just owned by capitalists, it's owned by everybody, especially the people who work on that property. He disagrees with the low-paying workers and his high-paying workers, or high-paying non-workers. So the lower class is normally the people who get paid the least, and the capitalists are the people who bring in the money, bring in the benefits, when really they're just in charge of those people who are in the lower class, actually putting in the work. He suggests that everybody should be paid based off of their ability and based off of their needs and not just their position. So Marx is a materialist because he believes that those money is unequal to, since it's unequal to everybody, not everybody will be happy. And we found a good quote supporting that. The immediate aim of the communists is the same as that all of the other proletarian parties. Formation of the proletarian into class, overthrow the bourgeois supremacy, conquest of political power in the proletariat. Page 44. So not enough people are getting what they want, and too much income is in the hands of few. In the hands of few are the capitalists. and not the many workers that are working on that capital. Agrees that equal distribution equals happiness, and without that equal distribution, people will be unhappy because everything is unfair.
Next up, we have the opposite of Karl Marx, John Hospers. We read from his Libertarian Manifesto, so obviously he's a libertarian, but what does that actually mean? Well, a libertarian is someone who emphasizes freedom and liberty as the absolute most important thing and the thing we should strive for. But it's important to note that his understanding of freedom is entirely negative. And what negative freedom is it's a freedom from things. It's a freedom from government intervention. Like if you think of our Bill of Rights, it's all negative freedom because it's freedom, from being forced to testify against ourselves. It's freedom from cruel and unusual punishment. You name it. Those are negative freedoms. Whereas positive freedoms that's the right to do something, to have access to things. And Hospers doesn't believe in that. He believes freedom is entirely negative. And in particular, he believes the most important right is the right of property, and that this is the foundational right, and we can't have the others without this one. And here's a quote, it's an important one. No one is anyone else's master, and no one is anyone else's slave. And that really summarizes his views. Those are his words, but what does it actually entail? Well, it entails, for one, complete economic freedom. He believes the only purpose of the government is to defend our life, liberty, and property. So in this case, the government exists to, well, just ensure that we have equal opportunity and that we can pursue whatever it is that makes us happy without harming others, of course. So under this definition, there's no room for wealth redistribution because if we take from the rich and give to the poor, well, that's theft, that's slavery essentially. So whether it's taxation or welfare, that's stealing from someone. They didn't want to give it up, they had to. So it's a form of slavery, really. And he believes that government should mainly be focused on two things. One, creating a military to defend our borders, and two, law enforcement and of course, to enforce basic laws like murder, theft, things like that, not wealth redistribution. It's also important to note that libertarians are socially liberal, so drugs, they think they should be decriminalized because, you're not hurting anyone except yourself. So, uh, yeah, so Hospers, he thinks that he agrees with Hobbes in a way because, like Hobbes, he believes that the government exists to enable you to, get what you want, to pursue what you want without being killed like you are in the state of nature. So, yeah, they agree on that, and that's Hospers.
Next, we have Charles W. Mills. He is a philosopher who focused on the social and political philosophy, and he really talked about the racial contract in his article that we read. He basically said that the racial contract is an unspoken agreement to benefit whites over the non-whites. He explains that the contract brings inequality internationally and globally because it only benefits the white people. It only benefits the white people and not the black community or anybody who's not white. However, just because it only benefits the white people, that doesn't mean every white person agrees with this racial contract. A lot of these people understand that it's unfair, and they agree with Mills that it's unfair that this racial contract is only focusing on one group of society. And to support this, quote on page 11, the general purpose of the contract is always the differential privilege of the whites as a group with respect to the non-whites as a group, the exploitation of their bodies, land, resources, and the denial of equal social economic opportunities to them. So all those things, the land, bodies, resources, and money, materialistic things, just like Marx and Hobbes. Inequality causes unhappiness. Happiness is everyone is treated the same regardless of race, equal opportunity is getting what you want, and getting what you want isn't only the white people getting what you want. It's also everybody split up evenly, not just whites.
Last but not least, we read Iris Marion Young and her work, The Five Faces of Oppression. And the interesting thing about Young is that she was, as she described herself, a citizen theorist. So she was not only sitting in her ivory tower writing philosophy, but she was she participated in activism. So whether it was racial equality, women's rights, labor, she was out there. She was protesting for it. So her attempt in Five Faces of Oppression, what she's trying to do is to really normalize this discussion of oppression, to bring it into our mainstream discussion. And in order to do that, she has to define oppression. And she breaks it down into these five categories. And if a group fits into either one or some or all of these categories, they're oppressed, but it just helps us to identify who is oppressed. And that's what she explains here in the quote is, this attempt to bring it into our discussion. And it's interesting if you look at these five faces, that three of them are economic, and these are exploitation, marginalization, and powerlessness. So in these three cases, the oppressed group doesn't have access to economic resources. They don't get the fruits of their labor. They're exploited, they can't get good jobs, and they don't have the power to create any change. There's also violence, which is self-explanatory. And then the last one, and this one's interesting, cultural imperialism, because it's not economic, it's cultural oppression, whereas these oppressed groups, they're prevented somehow from keeping their cultural traditions. So in this way, she agrees with Hobbes with these three economic aspects, because to a certain extent, happiness is getting what you want because you need to support yourself. But at the same time, she recognizes that there's more to happiness than this, because participating in your culture and having some kind of group identity based on shared heritage, she recognizes that, that can be a source of happiness for some, and that restricting this is a form of oppression. So she's complicated. She agrees with Hobbes in some ways, but it's not quite that simple for her.
And finally, we can conclude and confidently say that of these 8 philosophers, which one agrees and which one disagrees with Hobbes' statement that happiness is getting what you want. For those who agree, we said that Adam Smith, Karl Marx, John Hospers, and Charles W. Mills all have a few things in common. One of the being a materialistic view. For Adam Smith, he was the father of capitalism, and he talked about the 4 stages, which is hunting, shepherding, agriculture, and then commercial, which is where we are now with being, capitalism. So he agreed that money, being a materialistic thing, will make people happy. Karl Marx suggested that equal distribution of money and classes will make people happy, instead of inequality of that distribution where it's separated between classes. Hosper believed that property rights should be publicly instead of just owned by people, and a complete economic freedom. John and Mills also suggested that equality causes happiness and equal opportunity causes happiness. So all those philosophers agree that materialistic views focus on economics, and libertarian, and they're all libertarians and socialists, believe that those are what really give desires to people. For those who disagree with Hobbes, Plato, John Stuart Mill, and Mary Wollstonecraft, they believe instead of having those materialistic things and those things that give us desire, they focus on the long-term end goal of happiness, which is equal opportunity, virtues, and justice. Plato talks about the 4 virtues of a just society is a happy society. Without a just society, people will be unhappy and everything's going to be unfair and justice will not be served. Mill talks about the values of truth. So the virtues and the moral beliefs and the high standards, uh, those are very important to us being humans instead of just money. And Wollstonecraft pushes for equal rights for women, so equal opportunity for everybody, including women, not just and also race. And we'll go into that, but mainly Wollstonecraft focused on women. Um, and like we said, John talked about Young, how complicated she was with the how she supports the economic issues. They're important, but segregated groups are harder for people to connect together. So that is why we think that she is complicated, because it is hard to uh, for her to. It's she basically like agreeing to disagreeing that desires will make people happy. Um, and that is it for our final project. This was constructed of me and John. Unfortunately, Logan wasn't able to be here because of some personal issues. But thank you for listening, and we appreciate it.
Thank you.